Kenny Xu is the author of the upcoming book, An Inconvenient Minority, which is about discrimination in the Ivy League and how it hurts Asian Americans.
Harvard University grades applicants on 3 things: academics, extracurriculars, and a personality score. But what they do with the personality score, which is an entirely subjective metric, is that they use it to discriminate against Asian Americans using these invidious, vicious stereotypes against Asian Americans to say, oh, we're just test-taking robots with no personalities. China underwent its own cultural revolution, right, where they discriminated, where they persecuted those who they deemed as intellectuals. It was a very anti-meritocratic ideology. While we are discriminating against the most meritorious, while we're fomenting this race war, while we're talking about all of these ideas of equity and inclusion, China is just marching on ahead. I think the fair thing that should happen is that Harvard admissions and admissions processes, hiring processes, promotion processes should be a meritocracy. And studies have shown that if you try to artificially inflate racial minorities into places that they are not qualified for, they have higher rates of depression, they change out of their majors more frequently, they graduate at lower rates, they get lower grades. You want to match people with where the opportunities are best suited for them. And you shouldn't deny somebody else's excellence just for the sake of racial equity. Critical race theory asserts that the world in America is divided into a racial caste system, whites on the top, blacks on the bottom, but they have no idea what to do with Asian Americans, because Asian Americans are a minority. You know, they have been discriminated against in this country, and yet they succeed and they achieve. It has to do with culture. You know, Asian Americans study twice as many hours as the average American. Critical race theory is anti-meritocratic. It believes that merit is racist. You know, Harvard's own estimate said that if Asians were not discriminated against, they would be 43% of the student body. And I say this is a national security issue because you need, if you want to compete with China in the tech war, you need the best and the brightest. You need the best and the brightest to go to the best schools. And you know, we have these elite schools now like Harvard abdicating their responsibility to admit the best and brightest just because of their race. Imagine not only how unfair that is, but how that is detrimental to our national security and our technology interests.
You know, this is something that Asian Americans need to fight for and ordinary Americans need to fight for, because we should not be treated on the basis of the color of our skin for any reason. Even if Harvard says we need, you know, more diversity, that's not a reason to discriminate against a certain race. I think it's absolutely political. I mean, you have to look at identity politics and how you can farm votes and make careers out of fixating on race.
So we have a narrative right now that posits that white people are at the top and black people are at the bottom, but what are they going to do with Asian Americans? Because Asian Americans do not fit this narrative. They are the inconvenient minority. They were historically discriminated against. They face discrimination. 80% of Vietnamese Americans arrived in this country without even knowing English. And within one generation, they were able to turn their kids into college graduates at a higher rate than even white Americans. So many of these Asian Americans who've come here have literally fled from communism, from the Cultural Revolution, from Pol Pot, from dictatorships, from identity politics. And, you know, they've come here and they face discrimination in the United States, Chinese exclusion, Japanese internment, and yet they still achieve. So they aren't, first of all, black Americans are in underperforming schools. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But they're in underperforming schools, but why are the schools underperforming? It is the failure of the public education system, which is made up of not just whites, but blacks, Latinos, and Asians as well. And so that's the problem. It's not racism. That's what I'm saying.
Certainly the city governments.
But you have to take accountability for your own communities. That's what you have to do. You have to, because that's the only way you can achieve, it's the only way you can succeed in this country, if you take accountability for your own community and your own actions.
Yes, Mark, and I talk about in my book, An Inconvenient Minority, the price that we pay for diversity and inclusion. And to the American taxpayer, it's very high. And here are the facts, Mark. Ethnic studies does not help Black and Hispanic Americans. You know, ethnic studies actually causes Black and Hispanic Americans to self-stereotype, which evidence shows results in lower performance on tests because they believe that they're racially not capable of achieving. You know, I've seen equity initiatives, hundreds of millions of dollars spent, $140 million were spent in Montgomery County in the name of equity, and 4 years of that spending achieved nothing for Black and Hispanic Americans. It did not decrease the achievement gap, it actually increased it. So I cannot let a parasitic ideology take over the minds of young minority children, and this is why I'm fighting it with my book, An Inconvenient Minority, and my group, Color Us United, colorusunited.org.